Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a movie challenge. I've done a couple of these in the past. The one I have on this channel is my 31 horror movies throughout the month of October challenge, and that was really fun, and I've been looking for one to do ever since then, but I haven't really found one that struck me. However, recently I came across one on Letterboxd, and that is the March Around the World challenge. And this is a challenge where you watch 30 foreign films throughout the month of March, each one being from a different country. The only rule is that one of those movies has to be from a certain specified country. This year it's Egypt. But other than that, you're free to watch whatever movies you want in whatever time frame that you want to. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be watching a new film every day, and I will check back and record my thoughts on each film and my feelings about the challenge every Friday. And then come the last Friday of the month, the 31st, I will give an overview of my thoughts and tell you which one of the movies that I watched was my favorite. This should be a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, without further ado, let's begin. The first film I watched for this challenge was a Czechoslovakian film entitled Daises from 1966. Now, I've talked about this film before on my earlier video, the coming-of-age iceberg video. You can watch that here. Now I've watched the movie, and it's basically what I expected it to be. It's a very surrealist movie about two girls trying to break societal norms and gender roles of what they are expected to be, and it does it in a pretty fun way. The imagery and the visuals is really interesting and really creative and really engaging. That's probably the best part of the movie. It's a unique movie to be sure, but I can't say it's truly amazing just because of how samey the whole movie starts to feel after a while, and just how little purpose there is to the story. It doesn't really say a whole lot outside of the very surface level ideas. At least it doesn't come off that way to me. So I'll probably give this one a 7 out of 10 because it is a lot of fun, but it isn't great. The second movie I watched is also the oldest movie I'm going to be watching for this challenge. This movie comes out of Japan, of 1952, and it's an Akira Kurosawa movie, who is a very influential and famous director. Really, his influence on cinema as a whole just cannot be overstated. However, I've not seen any of his Japanese language work, which most of his work is in Japanese. Actually, all of his work, except for one movie, Daises Ikiru, which is a Russian movie, which is the only movie I've seen from him. This movie, Ikiru, is a reflection on life and death and just how short life is and what we make of life while we're still here. All the writing and acting is really great, and it really allows you to get invested in this character, this guy who is going to die soon and is trying to come to terms with his life and what he's done in his life, and is trying to make a difference while he still can. While the movie is truly amazing, I do have a complaint about it, and that mainly has to do with the pacing. It's around 2.5 hours long, and even though 2.5 hour long movies aren't the longest thing in the world, and they can be done really well, hell, 3 hour long movies can be done really well, this movie doesn't really feel like it uses all of that time to its advantage. You can kind of cut down a lot of the first 2 acts of this movie, and the groundwork would still be there for the third act, which is by far the best part of the movie. The film has this major shift in the third act, where it drastically changes, not the story is still the same, but it changes the lens that the story is being seen through. I don't want to spoil any of the movie, because it is truly amazing and it is really great, and the payoff is amazing when you get to that ending, but it just takes a while to get there, at least for me. And I would give this movie an 8 out of 10. Next week I should have a full slate of 7 movies I've watched, and we can look at those when the time comes. The first film I watched this week was a movie called Insomnia from Norway. It is a crime thriller about a man trying to solve a murder in a town where the sun never sets. He grows increasingly paranoid due to his insomnia, and while I like the concept, I think it's a really interesting concept, I do have to say that it doesn't really work. Especially since this guy just isn't likable. Like, yeah, sure, his condition is what's leading him to making some of these really stupid decisions, but even if I were an insomniac, if I could not sleep, and I was very sleep deprived, and I wasn't thinking properly, the decisions that he makes are so stupid, and they make logically no sense whatsoever given what he knows, that this guy is not making these decisions purely because of his insomnia, he's making them because he's just an idiot. I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. It was alright, it has some interesting concepts, like I said, but just overall the execution of it from a story standpoint just isn't that great. Now, Guillermo del Toro is a filmmaker I'm rather familiar with. I've seen a lot of his work, and so I decided to check out his 2001 movie, The Devil's Backbone. There is some really disturbing stuff in this movie, and it's especially interesting because these messed up things, these really despicable actions, are seen through the eyes of kids, including the paranormal elements, which are, in this case, ghosts. I also feel like this movie sometimes uses them in just kind of like cop-out ways, like kind of cheap jump scare ways, instead of actually exploring what their whole deal is. It does that later, but for most of the movie, it's kind of just used as like a creepy thing. I still really love the movie overall, and it is an incredibly depressing and dark and bleak film, but it still is really beautiful, and it still explores a lot of ideas and concepts and has a lot to say. So I think I'll give this one an 8 out of 10. The next movie on this list is from 2011, and it is Circumstance from Iran. This is a coming-of-age story about growing up and really trying to discover yourself and who you really are and what you want to be in a very harsh political climate where you are constantly being oppressed at every turn. The movie also has some interesting things to say about generational divides, and these generational divides are specifically ones that have to do with Iranian culture. I think that the music in this movie is used really well, and there are some really interesting directorial decisions in terms of how certain shots are framed and used. There's a lot of uses of CCTV cameras and footage. I do feel like some of the characters aren't fully fleshed out, specifically the brother character. I just feel like his character was kind of too over the top evil without really any real reason for why he's doing what he's doing. We get some sort of insight into his past and his backstory, but he just seems too comically evil, too comically over the top to really make sense in this movie that's a lot more grounded other than him. There's not really a whole lot else to say about it. I liked it, and I'll give this one a 7 out of 10. The Mirror is a 1975 surrealist Russian film directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, who is really well renowned for his sort of non-literal surrealist works, and this is the first one of his I've seen, and I really liked it. It reminded me a lot of Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life. They are both similar reflections on growing up, told through a very non-literal lens, jumping around from moment to moment in this man's childhood as he recollects on his experiences, and it jumps back and forth between not only time but also like the way it's shot and the way shots are framed. Black and white shots, there's shots that are in color, there's some archival footage. It's very all over the place, but that's intentional, and honestly, I feel like there's a beauty that can be found in this chaos, so I'm gonna give this one a 9 out of 10. Such a great movie. The next one I watched was from Finland, and it's a 2002 comedy drama called A Man Without a Past. It's about a guy that gets beaten up and gets amnesia, and then he kind of has to start his whole life over from scratch. And it has some good things to say, it has some interesting ideas, how you've been kind of taking your life for granted, and how important it is to really just live every moment to the fullest. And that's kind of what this guy realizes throughout the film. And honestly, even though this ending does touch on those themes, I still found it really predictable and generic. I kind of tell what the film was trying to say and where it was going right off the bat. It doesn't really do a whole lot for me. It's pretty monotonous, it gets pretty boring after a while. Yeah, there's some funny moments, but overall it's just doesn't really do anything for me. So I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. I don't really have a whole lot to say about it because not really a whole lot happened. This film is a really obscure Dutch movie from 1986 entitled The Assault. It only has around 400 logs on Letterboxd, and I think that's really sad because this movie is really good and it's really underrated and really overlooked, and I feel like more people should talk about it, especially since it won the Oscar for Best Foreign Feature in 1986. This movie follows a boy named Anton and an experience, an event that he saw and witnessed and that really changed the course of his life. And we see him grow old throughout the years as he reflects. The movie's really tense and suspenseful, especially in its opening scene. It really is able to draw you in and really get you on the edge of your seat for what's about to happen. As the movie goes on, you really start to realize just how important that first scene was and how much was established in that short amount of time. Just so interesting and really sad at points, and it's just really satisfying by the end to see him finally get closure on this thing that has haunted him for so long. And I would give this one an 8 out of 10. It's a really good movie. This next movie is from Argentina, and it's called The Secret in Their Eyes. It's a crime thriller murder mystery movie. It doesn't really do anything crazy with the murder mystery. It's a pretty cut and dry murder story. There's not anything really insane going on there. It's kind of a dual narrative structure, seeing the events occur as they occurred, but also seeing 25 years later, the people involved in these events, the guy that investigated them and the people that surrounded him, as he writes these events into a novel, and kind of how he has reflected on these events and how they have continued to stick with him. It's a really interesting and investing film about our obsession and unquenchable urge to make things right and to get justice. And the ending is such an incredible conclusion to these ideas, to the story, that just works so well and is so incredibly satisfying. It's crazy how much insane stuff happens in this movie without any forewarning or prior notice. And I'll give this one a 9 out of 10. It's definitely my favorite so far of this whole challenge. My least favorite so far of this whole challenge and of this week is Insomnia, followed closely by A Man Without a Past. Insomnia is just more insufferable and more just annoying, whereas A Man Without a Past is kind of boring. I am excited to watch some more movies and to check in with you next Friday. To start this week off, I watched a French film from 1950 by Francois Truffaut, entitled The 400 Blows. The 400 Blows is another movie I've talked about before on my Coming of Age iceberg. You can watch that here, I think, actually. The movie follows a young boy named Anton, and is actually the first of a series of films by Francois Truffaut that follow the life of Anton. I can't speak for the quality of the other movies in that series, but I can say that this film is really amazing. The film is an incredibly accurate and profound portrayal of what it's like to grow up in a world where no one really understands you. It's a film that understands just how alienating and cruel childhood can be. It's such a beautiful film, the shots are breathtaking, and the soundtrack's also beautifully composed. It's really just such a beautifully bleak exploration of childhood and how it feels to grow up. Even though it's over 60 years old by this point, it's still a very accurate portrayal of growing up. It really hits harder now than ever before. It's such an amazing movie, and I know I said this about the last film, but this has now bumped up to the top spot on the list of movies I watched this month. The next movie I watched was a Danish film by Lars von Trier called Breaking the Waves. The film looks amazing. It's really beautifully shot. The film takes a very naturalistic approach to its filmmaking. The shots are almost entirely handheld, and just the style of the movie feels so naturalistic and raw. The acting also adds to this almost documentary-esque feel. Character Bess, played by Emily Watson, at points looks right into the camera. It somehow adds to just how real and raw everything feels, and it really gets you invested in the story of this character. However, looking past the technical aspects of the movie, the story just isn't really my thing. Lars von Trier's movies have a really common theme of innocent women suffering. He does this in Dancer in the Dark, in Dogville, and I'm sure in other movies. Everything she's doing because she thinks it'll save her husband. But the reason why she thinks this will save her husband, because her husband is taking advantage of her, and because she is such a vulnerable person who has been manipulated by everyone around her in her life, she thinks that doing these horrible things to herself will somehow result in her husband getting better. However, the movie itself views these things that she's doing through a lens of it will actually save her husband, because her husband, spoiler alert, does get saved. He gets better. God is real in this movie. So the actual person that's telling her to do these things is not just her internal monologue kind of manipulating her into following her husband's abusive orders, but is actually God himself. The film actually thinks that what she's doing is somehow showing that she is pure of heart and she really truly loves her husband by doing these things, and that someone that really loves. It's really weird, and I just can't get behind it, because for me at least, it just doesn't make any sense. I feel like the film's story and themes are awful and despicable at worst, or just downright confusing and hard to follow at best. The film looks beautiful, don't get me wrong, but the story itself is just kind of convoluted, hard to follow, strange, and at points seems really, really bad. So I'm gonna give this one a 7 out of 10. Maybe I'm being a bit too generous because of just how good it looks. Who Killed Captain Alex is kind of a weird movie. given how it was made. It was made in Uganda around 2010 on an almost $0 budget. The film is kind of weird, kind of strange, a little odd, but because of how weird and odd it is, it's really endearing in a way. The story is almost nonsensical. It's really hard to follow, and it's basically just action for action's sake. There's no real artistic merit to this movie. Nothing is really being said. It's just a fun little action movie. And usually, I wouldn't really like this kind of movie. I find it fun and endearing because of the world it was made in, and the place and time it was made in. Also, it's really funny. There's this video joker, what the film calls it, which is like a narrator who talks over the whole movie and doesn't really add anything of note besides just riffing on what's going on in the film. And this could be annoying in a movie that I would actually care about, but because I don't care about anything that's going on, and the story is actually kind of the worst part of it, this guy that's just riffing on the story throughout the whole thing kind of adds to the movie. So I'll give this a 6 out of 10. It's not good by any means, but it's too fun to say it's awful. Batch 81 is a Filipino movie from 1982. It's a psychological thriller drama about some guys who are trying to become part of a frat house and have to put up with a lot of very mentally exhausting and physically painful hazing practices to become a part of this frat house. You know, going into the movie, I thought it was just going to be a stupid movie about some guys getting basically tortured for a little while, and that's not really what it is. It's actually a lot more interesting than that. It's a movie that really showcases this toxic cycle of masculinity, and it really shows how damaging these toxic ideologies can be on young minds. And it shows all this in a really fun and engaging way. By the time our main character, Sid, realizes what's actually going on, it's too late. He's too deep into it to really back out now. The ending's both triumphant, but incredibly bleak. It's triumphant from a character standpoint, because they're getting what they want, but it's bleak from our audience standpoint, because we know what's going to happen to these characters. So I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. Yeah, it's kind of dumb at points. Some things don't make a whole lot of sense, some things are kind of stupid, but overall, I think the themes of this movie kind of salvage it and make it a lot better than it would be otherwise. The next film is a 2014 movie, I think, called Theeb, from the Middle Eastern country of Jordan. Theeb is a movie about a young boy who works as like a guide for Englishmen. It's kind of boring, you know. I don't really care about the story that's going on. I don't really care about these characters. Once we get past a certain point, we get to a point where this kid has to kind of live on his own, and that's interesting, seeing this kid sort of survive by himself, but it doesn't really last very long, and it takes way too long to get to it. Also, a lot of the acting feels really bad and cheap, and the production design, even though it takes place in World War I, it doesn't really feel like it's a World War I movie. Like, I kept having to remember that this movie is supposed to be a period piece, so I guess I'm gonna give this one a 5 out of 10, because it really was just boring. Mandabi is a 1968 film from Senegal, following an incompetent and oafish man who is trying desperately to fulfill this money order that has been sent to him by his nephew. It's kind of a dark comedy. It's pretty funny watching this man constantly trying to get this money and getting so close to receiving it, but always taking one step further back from his final goal. I love how this movie really feels. As it goes on, it gets more like anxiety-ridden, more disorienting, and this tone can be felt through not only the cinematography but also like the sound design and the acting as these people get more and more desperate for this money. Its premise is simple and does get a bit old after a bit, but I feel like it still showcases this premise in an interesting enough way for it to really work for the entire runtime, especially since the runtime is not that long. It's only an hour and a half. It's a pretty short film, pretty fun film, and it has some stuff to say. So I'm gonna give this one a 7 out of 10. It's not a masterpiece or anything, but it is pretty interesting. It has some good things to say, and it showcases these things in a pretty fun and engaging way. The final film I watched this week was from the year 2000. It's a Swedish movie entitled Together by Lukas Moodysson. I love how accurately Lukas Moodysson is able to capture human relationships and just human nature in general. He does this in all of his movies, but especially in this one. This one takes place in the 1970s at a hippie commune, and we see a lot of characters and their stories and their relationship with other characters at this house. And all of these stories and relationships are executed really well and showcase a lot of different facets of human society, from childhood relationships like romances and just friendships to more adult sexual relationships and romances. They're all executed pretty excellently here. Even though there's a lot going on, it balances all of the themes and ideas and storylines really well, and by the end, everything's just concluded in a really fun and satisfying way. The directorial and editing decisions also add to its very naturalistic vibe. There are some scenes, like the throw-up scene, where the movements of the camera are very handheld. It's a really beautiful film that really executes all those themes really expertly in a really natural way, and I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. Well, that's it for this week. My favorite of the week and of the whole challenge so far is Together. My least favorite of the week and the whole challenge so far is Theeb. It is kind of weighing on me a little bit having to watch a new movie every day. I feel that more when the movies are more unremarkable. But it is still good to be watching some new movies from countries I would otherwise not be watching. So I hope to find more of those movies next week, and I'll check back in with you next Friday. The first film I watched this week is my Mexican pick, Solo con tu Perrita, from 1991, directed by Alfonso Cuarón. Now, I really like Alfonso Cuarón's movies, so I was excited to check this one out. It's a dark comedy following a rather dumb man named Thomas and his sexual misadventures. He does some pretty messed up things throughout the movie, and he's kind of an awful guy, but due to how it's written, it comes off less as malicious and more as just really stupid and incompetent. It doesn't take itself seriously, which works for the story it's telling. It doesn't do anything crazy new or original or innovative, but it doesn't really need to. It's a fun little nice movie, and I'm gonna give this one a 7 out of 10. It's nothing amazing, but it's nothing awful either. It's just pretty good. The next one I watched is another older one. This one's by Satyajit Ray. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that.
Satyajit Ray.
And it's his 1955 movie Pather Panchali. Now, this is a coming-of-age story about a young boy living in poverty. This is actually part of a trilogy, the Apu trilogy, and this is just the first chapter in that larger story. I haven't seen those other films, but this one was pretty good. It does a great job at portraying the more low-class Indians living in rural conditions. I also like how it doesn't draw attention to these characters' status in terms of their wealth. Yeah, sure, it's clear that these people are not the most affluent people around. They definitely do live in poverty, but the film isn't making sure that you know that. It's just there for you to notice. It's very naturalistic in that way. I like how it shows it through the eyes of younger children. Apu and his sister are our main characters throughout the film, and we follow them and their little fun misadventures and the hijinks they get into. The craziest thing that happens in this movie is definitely the ending. I do wish they focused on it a little bit more, because it kind of comes out of nowhere and they don't really deal with the repercussions of how it affects these people or this community in any real way. It just kind of happens and the movie ends soon after. And again, it might play into the second film. It probably does, so I can't count it off too much for that. So I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. Speaking of coming of age stories, this one is also a coming of age story. But unlike the last film, which was a coming of age story, this one is certainly not a little coming of age story. It's a really beefy one, in fact. It's the only 3-hour-long movie on this list, or at least it's nearly 3 hours, and I really liked it. The film is, of course, Cinema Paradiso, which is an Italian movie from 1988, although it was released in the States in 1990. Technically, there are 2 cuts of this film available. The original director's cut, which I watched, which is the one that he intended to be seen, and it's definitely the most full version of the movie. And then there's the 2-hour-long theatrical cut, which was released in the States and other territories, and it basically removes all meaning and context from the events we see unfold throughout this movie. See, this film is a coming-of-age story, but it's told in retrospect. We see this kid's childhood as he grows up in Italy, surrounded by film. He particularly takes to a projectionist who becomes his mentor, apprentice, sort of a father figure, and we really see his blossoming love of movies, which he later goes on to be a film director, as we see in flashbacks that occur at the very beginning and the very end of the film. Also, during his childhood, he falls in love with a woman. named Elena. And at some point, he's forced to either chase his dreams of being a motion picture director or chase a relationship with Elena. To me, at least, I feel like this section of the film doesn't really work by itself. Now, the third act puts it all in perspective and makes it all make sense together, because it shows him now a very popular and famous motion picture director, and he comes back to his town and ends up reconnecting with Elena. And this causes him to put into perspective the choices that he's made and have to cope with the fact that his life could have gone drastically differently if he did things a bit different. But he also gets closure on his childhood. It's a really beautiful and profound story that just works so well. So I would really recommend this movie. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. It was amazing. However, if you are to watch it, please don't give in to peer pressure with all the people saying that you need to watch the 2-hour theatrical Weinstein cut, and instead watch the original director-intended cut, the 3-hour-long version. The next one I watched is one of the very few movies to come out of the Middle Eastern country of Palestine. It's pretty short, at only a little bit over 90 minutes, but it uses that time really well. It takes a bit to get going, to really get into what's happening, and the setup isn't perfect. It's kinda dumb, kinda contrived, it doesn't always work, but by the end, I feel like everything really pays off. It has really interesting themes about the government and how they kind of force people to do their bidding, and also just how far people will go to protect themselves and keep themselves safe. All the characters are super interesting, and you really feel for them and their hardships. The film's a pretty investing watch. You really get into it by the end. I really loved it. I really loved what it was saying, and I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Michael Haneke is a film director who's made a lot of really great movies in the past. This film, his 2009 outing, The White Ribbon, is a German movie about a man who comes to teach in this town right before the beginning of World War I. And this is a very small, isolated German village in the north of Germany. And we see the events of the film unfold through his retelling of the story as an old man. This man is less of a fully fleshed out character and more of just a guy that the audience can relate to, because he's an outsider to the village. He's not native, he doesn't know all the inner workings of the village, and we kind of see in real time him realizing just how messed up this village is and just all the crazy and insane things that are occurring in this village at the same rate that we do. And the movie really touches on really interesting, profound, and thought-provoking themes about like nature versus nurture, and how people with immense power can really abuse their power and ruin the lives of the other people below them. I get the reason why the ending ends where it does, and it really works with the idea of this being a story that's being recollected on. He doesn't ever get closure. He doesn't really fully ever understand what's happening, and I like how that adds to speculation on the audience's part, how it allows us to really come to our own terms with what happened. The film still leaves us with a lot to chew on, and it is a really intense, emotional, thought-provoking, and kind of just a odd movie in the best of ways. And yeah, I really love this one. I'm going to also give this a 9 out of 10. The next one I watched was a 1963 really obscure Greek film called The Red Lanterns. It follows a group of prostitutes living in a brothel before the banning of prostitution in Greece. Honestly, this would be kind of interesting, just following their lives, if it was shown in a realistic way that felt grounded and natural, but it's not. It's shown in a very studio way, a very neutered way. Also, the production design is just bland and boring. Every aspect of this movie is bland and boring. The main street that this brothel's on is supposed to be kind of grimy and dirty and nasty. It just feels like a studio. None of it feels real or natural. It all feels so phony. And that's really my biggest complaint with this movie. And I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. This film is a Chinese movie by director Ang Lee from the year 2000 called Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Now, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is a martial arts film that is a lot of fun. Every fight scene, despite how silly it is just so masterfully executed, it also can get a little emotional at points. The actors are really giving their all, especially Michelle Yeoh is giving a really amazing performance, as she always does. It's a great, entertaining, investing action movie that's way better than any modern Western action movie on the market, and I would give this an 8 out of 10. Really fantastic. Well, that was all the films of this week. I'll see you next time. The first film I watched this week is the most recent film I watched for this whole challenge, and that's the 2017 Chilean film A Fantastic Woman, directed by Sebastian Liello. It follows a transgender woman named Marina Vidal and her attempts to navigate an incredibly hostile world following the death of her partner. It presents the story in not a very nuanced way. It's very straightforward with what it's saying, but I think it works pretty well. The leading lady, Daniela Vega, definitely gives a very heart-wrenching and emotionally impactful performance that really hits you hard. It works partially because she is a transgender woman herself, so it definitely feels like it's coming from more of a realistic place and not an outsider's perspective in that way. I have seen some people call this film unnecessarily cruel or even misery porn, but that doesn't really work with this film because, spoiler alert, she does win by the end and she comes out on the other side stronger than ever. Even though it might be a bit over the top at points with its scenes of cruelty, especially one scene, it really works to the film's advantage, and it does kind of make you uncomfortable, which is the point. It's trying to make you uncomfortable and realize the gravity of the situation at hand. So yeah, I really love this movie. I think it's a really great performance, a really great film with a really great message, and it works really well. And I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Next, we're heading over to the nearby country of Brazil and looking at 1998's Central Station, which is a film that follows a middle-aged woman who's very cynical and beaten down by the world, follows her journeys and misadventures with a young boy who really helps her to open her eyes. I mean, it's pretty predictable in terms of plot. We've seen this story done over and over again, really. But it does work really well, and it is pretty emotionally impactful, and it does bring up some interesting themes and ideas. All these characters, especially the main character Dora, feels really fleshed out. You understand why she is the way she is, and what events in her life had led her to act this way and view the world in this way. Once they hit the road and the film becomes a road trip movie, it gets a lot more interesting because they meet a lot of characters that really play into the past of these characters, and it just becomes a really nice, fun, interesting, intelligent drama. So I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. The next one I watched is a film from Thailand by art house filmmaker. It's a 2004 film, Tropical Malady, and it is a gay romance, kind of. It starts out pretty normal. These characters are very interesting, the relationship's very fun. And then we jump to the second half, which is equally as interesting, if not more so. It's very strange and surrealist in the second half. A guy in the jungle is looking for like a shape-shifting tiger shaman. It's very weird, very strange, very surreal, very ethereal. It ties into the general themes of the film, and you know, the two acts do make sense with each other story-wise and themes-wise. I get why they're both together, but I don't really like how the cutoff is kind of abrupt. Maybe if they intersperse the two parts together in some way, instead of having it be like part 1 then part 2, it would have worked better, but as it is now, it doesn't work the best for me. I still think it's really good. I think it executes its themes very well. I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Next one I watched was Krzysztof Kiełowski's Polish movie. It was finished in 1981, but it was suppressed by the Polish government until 1987. And this film is, of course, Blind Chance. I like the film for its very interesting structure. It's split into 3 different segments, I guess, that all follow this guy's life, but it follows different forks of his life, different paths he could have gone down, depending on the outcome of his interaction at a train station. It's really interesting in how it approaches this idea of fate and chance, and how much of our lives is really set in stone, and how much of it can be changed based on butterfly effect-like principles. It also has political implications, especially for the era of communist Poland it was made in. And even though a lot of the aspects of his life are left up to chance. They don't seem arbitrary. I'm gonna give this one a 9 out of 10. 1993's The Piano, directed by Jane Campion, about a mute woman who moves to New Zealand with her brand new husband. And the very dramatic, almost Shakespearean-like events that occur. It does really feel like a Shakespearean tragedy, and just how over the top a lot of the events in this movie are. But it does it in a way that you can really have fun with. I also really like the native people in the movie and how they play into the themes of kind of feeling like an outsider. The writing is also excellent. The closing monologue especially is just so insanely good. Cinematography is also pretty great for the most part, although some aspects of it do feel a little bit dated. And the music is incredible as well. Yeah, this is an 8 out of 10. It was really fun, really great, really crazy, and just a really nice watch. This next one I watched was Park Chan-wook's 2016 movie, The Handmaiden. It's an incredibly delicate and interesting narrative spiderweb of a story that's constantly recontextualizing itself at every turn, constantly showing its events through different lenses and perspectives, and constantly changing exactly what happened in every single one of them in a way that feels just so incredibly satisfying. And the film showcases all of this in such an incredibly interesting, riveting, and investing way that doesn't really get confusing despite how much is happening throughout the film. And these characters are just so incredibly well fleshed out. Even the ones that feel flat or generic at first really get a lot of added depth as the film goes on and it changes and recontextualizes. We also get a lot of really interesting and in-depth backstories and flashbacks to their lives and how things that happened in their lives really affected who they are. A huge part of why these characters work so well is not just the writing, which is immaculate as I already stated, but also the acting. These performers are able to really portray these characters in super interesting ways, even as they're constantly changing. These characters still feel the same, they still feel like the same people, even if they're being portrayed in a slightly different way and through a slightly different lens. And like all of Park Chan-wook's films, there is a disturbing edge to this movie. Even though it is disturbing, it doesn't just feel disturbing for the sake of it. The movie ends in just such a satisfying way, and all the people that do these messed up things kind of get their comeuppance. The beautiful nature of this film also carries over into its cinematography. The scenes of nature in this film are just so well constructed. And yeah, this film's a real masterpiece. It's a really crazily complicated and complex film, but it all just comes together in such a satisfying and interesting and investing way. And I'm giving this one a 10 out of 10. This was my Egyptian pick, which, again, I had to do an Egyptian movie as of the challenge rules. The movie I went with was a 1965 film, The Sin. It was pretty good, although it took a little bit to get going. But once it got going, it really got going. The main catalyst for the story, the big event that happens, really takes you by shock and surprise and comes out of nowhere, is really effective and really works in the movie's favor. And it also works up after this main catalyst, this main event that drives the story into motion. The film never really stops being interesting. It's just so interesting to see this main character have to face consequences for something that she isn't really even at fault for, something that just happened to her, and how it changes her life and affects her in really the worst of ways. And I'm gonna give this one a 7 out of 10. That's it for the challenge. My favorite film of the week was, of course, The Handmaiden, which is my top film of the whole challenge, and my least favorite of the week was The Sin, which I still really liked. I'm gonna go over my top 10 of the challenge. Number 10 is The Devil's Backbone. Number 9 is Ikiru. Number 8 is Cinema Paradiso. Number 7 is Mirror. Number 6 is Secret in Their Eyes. Number 5 is The White Ribbon. Number 4 is Blind Chance. Number 3 is The 400 Blows. Number 2 is Together. And finally, number 1 is The Handmaiden. My bottom 5 are Who Killed Captain Alex, The Man Without a Past, Insomnia, Red Lanterns, and Theeb. I hope you liked this video, even though it was a bit more casual than some of my other videos. It was just me sitting at the camera reviewing films for a little while, which I hope you didn't mind too much. I do have some other more interesting videos coming if this isn't really your style. Don't worry, I'm not going to be doing this often. I just wanted to kind of document this challenge because I thought it was pretty interesting and I wanted to participate in it because I do like discovering new movies. I wanted to share that love with you. Bye guys!